Finley did not register Voron knocking Octavia from Willem's grip. She did not register anything either of them said. She only registered a heavy thump of body landing next to her, wet spray across her face, and a smell of blood. "You stupid fool! What have you done?" "Daddy?" Finley poured everything she had into the opening of her eyes one more time. She was dying, and she knew with the crystal clarity, the only dying she could feel this bad inside out. Everything was only pain. She could imagine the prized back eyelids, and found herself looking straight into Octavia's purple wide eyes. Octavia was shaking. No, she was convulsing. Her throat was so dark with blood, it appeared to be black and light of the cellar. Yet despite the shudders racking in her body, she did not break eye contact. Haltingly, she raised a forehoof to her neck. Finley thought that she was touching a wound in shock, as the way many victims did. Death was such an unwelcome surprise to some ponies. Only touching their own mortal injury was enough to convince the determination. She brought her cupped, bloodied hoof to Finley's mouth. "Drinking the blood healed him before," she whispered laboriously. "Please, Finley, they were going to kill me. In a way, you know it." Tears streaked her face. "Please, Celestia, please let this work. Don't let her die." Finley tried instinctively to resist, but Octavia easily pushed her hoof into her mouth. The familiar coppery taste touched her tongue, awakening the memory she had desperately had to try to forget in 10 years. "I don't care where you are in the past," Octavia slurred. "I love you for who you are, not for what or was." Her eyes dimmed. "Please, live for me." Her breath hitched in wetly in her throat. "Don't let him make you into some pony. You're not." Her words became a single breath. As she was still, her bloody hoof hit the floor. Her eyes stared, but Finley knew she could no longer see. Octavia was dead. Her Tavy was dead. Just like that, Finley was a small child again, screaming for the other pony who loved for her, and who had just had her father's twisted plans taken away. "Wintersong, run! Run far away and don't look back. I love you. I'm just happy I'm alive. Please live for me." Something exploded in Finley. In that moment, maybe it was a taste of blood. Maybe it was the last reserve of strength. If not, she knew she had. Or maybe she was powered by nothing more than raw grief and rage. Whatever it was, it allowed her to pull herself over to some pony who had moved her more than life itself, and accept her final gift. As Octavia's blood flowed down her throat, Finley felt the last fragments of the curse snap, and the dark power inside her surged out of its prison. Her nubby teeth elonged into sharp points. Her eyes prickled with heat. Strength rushed back into her limbs. She felt the cuts rise up and bruises melt away, leaving her dirty but whole and brimming with more strength than ever before. When she raised her head, mouth dripping, she knew her eyes were glowing full red for the first time in a decade. She did not fight the change. Finley roared. "What the?" Willem started to say. Finley moved faster with a striking snake. Voron and Willem flew apart, each reeling from their blows. He landed lightly, lips pushed back in a snarl as his own eyes flared red. Willem opened her wings to save herself, blaring fangs painted with blood. Octavia's blood. Finley was beyond rational thought. She moved in pure instinct, every action dedicated to savagery her own emotions. Something tickled her mind, but she forced it back, completely taken up with the vaulting off the wall, pinning Willem to the ground. The other vampire was a hissing, spitting bundle of air to concrete. Her teeth raked at Finley's forelegs, and she kicked upwards, trying to crush her belly with her hind hooves. Her wings beat fruitlessly, shedding feathers each time they struck the assailant. "Vindala, stop! I command you to stop!" came a deep voice from far away. "If you leave her with me, she could be a normal pony." "Get off of me!" Vindala shrieked. "You traitor! You don't deserve to be a part of Daddy's court!" "Daddy, I think she's going to cry, big sis. Don't cry. That's so babyish." The tickling made inside Vinley's head grew stronger. Voron roared, "I command you to stop!" He was inside the head. He was only trying to ignite the connection between them to make her bend his will. It always had worked before. None of his children have been able to resist him. A successful unicorn who carries my blood. Do you even know how rare you are? He had no idea. He had never had any idea. 10 years in a long time. It's especially a long time when one is learning magic the way Vinley had. She was much, much more powerful now than she had been when kind ponies pulled her and battered her broken body out of a river, and unknowingly set her on the path of a new, brighter life. Her horn glowed. Furniture around the room lifted off the ground, encasted in not the usual pink signature, but in a bright red radiance, like it was caught in the whirlpool. It then began to circle around the room, picking up speed as it went. Music stands, books, instruments, chairs, the table, all of it flew like scraps on paper in a gale, and the piano churned discordantly, wires and keys snapping loose that ricocheted off the wall. The broken pieces and music stand Voron had torn in half clattered on the ever-escalating loops, and their creature, tiny unmoving gray body. "Vandala!" Voron yelled above the den. "Stop this madness at once!" Vinley lifted her head. The flight fitting shattered, and sending glass shards in the maelstrom and plunging the little room into darkness. This proved no problem for the free vampires, who continued to snarl and bear fangs at each other in gloom. "You're not the boss of me anymore!" Vinley screamed. Voron leaped. The piano crashed down to where he had been. For a second he lost his footing. It seemed, though, as he would be snatched up by unnatural wind, but he grappled onto the uneven stones of the wall, clung on, the mane plastered against his face and neck. Pain smeared across Vinley's chest. She looked down to see Venom's teeth buried there. She had taken the opportunity presented by Vinley's averted attention. Ribs crunched in her powerful jaws. Vinley brought a hoof down to her sister's head, but Vinlem's bite was too strong. Pulling her free meant pulling a chunk out of her own flesh and bone. Vinley felt Voron move behind her, even though she didn't need to turn to see him. Working this way in the stones would not make him long. The maelstrom flattered as the nether rib shattered. Vinley wasn't sure whether she made the decision or the decision made her. Either way, her head whipped forward as she dove her teeth deep into her sister's skull. Venom screamed into her powerful mouthful. Vinley had tasted revolting blood. It turned and burned her tongue, yet she held on, knowing that if she didn't, she was dead and Octavia's sacrifice would have been for nothing. She released to hold on to Venom's forehooves, shifting her to brace their hind hooves into the vampire's hips. The rump pointed awkwardly into the air, and as she looked, her forehooves between Venom's ribcage and upper forelegs, Venom battered her with her newly feared hooves, grabbing the hands full of mane and tearing it out with chunks of bloody scalp that still attached. "No!" Voron thundered, understanding his shout. "Vandala, no!" Too late. Vinley snapped her body straight, digging all four of her hooves, clamping her jaws tight as she arched her back. Willem's body, smaller than her own, had already strained, tightened her grip, tore across the middle, spilling the vice versa onto the concrete floor. She had time to look down, the surprise before her, with a wet, popping crunch. Her head came away from her neck. "No!" Vinley tossed her head, releasing the skull with its frothy, bouncing curls, to be swept underneath the maelstrom of her own magic. She spat out the blood still in her mouth and leapt free of excavated corpse, clutching her chest wound with her forehoof. Every breath with a gloopy wheeze and crunching sensation as she moved. It was nauseating. Yet there was no time for her to focus on her injuries. She felt and heard Voron's attack, but had no time to react before he struck. He canoed her into from behind him, like a runaway carriage. What should have laid her flat instead sent them sprawling out, and he definitely turned into a roll. He tried to get a grip underneath the chin from behind her, but she bit down hard on one cracking hardest part of the hoof, but missing the soft, blood-rich frog at the center. He snarled right into her ear. She scrambled, trying to get her hooves underneath her so she could buck him off, or at least keep him away from her, the side of her exposed neck. She brought her bob sharply, trying to crush off his face, but the impact only succeeded in giving him the extra momentum to tear off her ear. Pain radiated through her skull, momentarily bolting all else, right when she needed all of her senses. No, I won't die like this! Finally gathering in her hooves, she rocketed backwards, pinning Voron against the wall with her body weight and her magic. He dodgily gripped her mid-drift from behind, trying with one good and one ruined hoof to tear open. She stampled, kicked, struggled, and battered at him, trying to free herself so she could throw the contents of the whirling room around him. You will never be free of me, Vandola, he growled into her ruined ear. In this life or the next, you will always be mine. With a wordless cry, she summoned a broken part of the music stand to her, bringing it up behind her to shove it deep to his side. She hoped that it would hit his vital organs with the blunt object, but the stab was an untidied one, and she couldn't be sure. The shock of it had a desired effect. Voron convulsed, and she leapt free, skidding around the face of him in the center of the room. A whirling dervish of furniture whipped them like a swollen river. Something red flashed past. She caught a slight glide of Verlum's curls and wide-open mouth. Voron's hoof whipped out, snatching it from midair. He cradled Verlum's head almost, gently giving a look Vinley would have never have even called fatherly on any pony else. Little one, he murmured, stroking back in devastated pigtails. You were always Daddy's favorite. Always my little girl. He planted a kiss on her forehead. Our children will carry on her legacy, my dear. She will not tarnish what you did to the bitterment of our family. Finley tensed when she looked up at her. Expression melted into a snarl as she brought his hooves together, crushing Venom's skull up into a bloody pulp and shattered bone. He ducked his head, gulping mouthfuls of brain matter and squishy red meat. He tugged free an eyeball, chewing briefly before swallowing. If you take her eyes, can I have them? I like the way they pop when you tuck them into your cheek and then bite down. Vandola, what have you done is unforgivable. With one foreleg, Voron pulled free of the music stand, ran it deep into the concrete floor. You have disobeyed me for the last time. Your worth is not equal to what you have cost me tonight. He threw the remains of Willem's skull with such a force that they ripped through the maelstrom, splattered against her face and the foreleg that she had instinctively raised. It was a dirty trick. She leapt to the side, but her concentration had been compromised. Voron bounded, though, through the maelstrom, punching his way through the table that tried to get in his way, resisting the pull of her telekinesis with a sheer momentum and raw strength. It should have been impossible for him to do more than stand against her power. But this was Voron, and Voron was good at doing the impossible, if it meant dominating her. Sudden icy fear swept through Vinley. It was an emotion, frosted by history. She couldn't stand against him. He was Voron. All you could do was run from Voron, and even then it wasn't enough. He always got what he wanted. Always. No! In desperation, she cast a spell she could think of. Fireworks sprayed from her in her horn, letting them up in the chest. The smell of burnt fur hit before he did. She kept casting, but she was weakening, and she knew it. Octavia's blood wasn't enough to sustain her levels in this combat. She punched frantically at Voron's throat, trying to crush his windpipe, throwing the fireworks into his eyes to blind him. He roared in pain as she wriggled free, turning back so hard in the chin half expected his head to fly off. No such luck. He kept swinging out a foreleg, trying to grab hold of her haunch. She heard the crack before she felt the pain of her own thigh bone. A scream ripped through her unbidden. She staggered away on her free legs, trying to lift one of her injured one, only be able to drag it limply behind her. Veron clambered onto his own hooves, wiping the blood from his eyes. He growled low on his throat. His eyes glowed red. The irises bathed while white in the fire that made him look like the demons of ponies wrote about in books about Tartarus. Despite herself, Vinley backed up. She only let out a cry as she stumbled over something. Pain rippling up through her injured leg, she sparked a glance and saw Octavia, half rolled onto her back from being stepped on. Her eyes started, although sightlessly, at the ceiling. All at once, Vinley realized that she could never get away from Voron. She was too strong. Well, he was too strong. He had always been strong. Even when she escaped long enough to build a new life for herself, he always had been there inside her head, not the controlling presence of her childhood and indolence, but the memory so strong that it dedicated her behavior even after she had fought herself a brand new pony. Finley scratched, just an ordinary unicorn, like anyone else, not Vandala Vershowski, the daughter of a monster. She had never truly let herself be free of him. Since the day she was born, he had always been a part of her, waiting in the wings while she acted out her life on stage, although she would never set hoof on again. But he had. He always had. He always would. Unless, Vinley set her stance. "You want me to be so bad, Daddy?" she spat. "Come and get me. I'd rather die than give in to you ever again." "Foolish child," he hissed. "You could ever been a part of something greater than yourself, and instead you force my hoof like this? I am ashamed to call you my daughter. The only thing you are useful now is a blood bag, and that is just useless children of Celestia you ever wanted to be like. I'd rather be one of Celestia's children than the daughter of some pony who's pathetic and not even his own father would have stand him the chance around. No matter what you do, you'll never be good enough for him. Never!" Voron's eyes flashed hot as the surface of the sun, while with a screech, he galloped at her, zigzagging so fast even she could barely track his movements. In less than a heartbeat, he was in front of her, and she thought she had made a major miscalculation. But she felt his breath, smelt the blood on it, and saw the raw hatred in his eyes, and cast a spell she had used on 10 years ago to cover up the crime scene in Professor Orchard's office. Instantly, the wavering of the maelstrom became a wildfire of flame. Voron looked up and aghast, and he was about to bolt when Vinley leapt up at him. He reared back, clearly expecting an attack to come from her jaws. Her broken leg shrieked, but she threw all of her weight and strength into the plunging broken shaft of the wooden cello neck up, under his ribcage, and into the twisted black heart. Voron roared. The maelstrom hurled inwards of the insane speed that picked up as whirled around him, crushing everything in its path. Vinley pumped everything inside she had into her magic and her muscle bag. She would not let Voron get away. As the flames rose higher and higher, the play's practice room had become conflagration. From what its roar became a scream, and became a weakening call, and then finally it stopped. Sunlight painted strange patterns on the wall. One of them had left the window open all at night. There was a bite to the air that spoke the promise of winter. It would be a running of leaves soon. "What are you thinking of?" came a sleepy voice from her chest. She looked down. "Good morning. How long have you been awake?" Octavia yawned delicately into her cup tooth. "Not long. I was just too comfortable to say anything. You make on an exceeding cozy pillow. You wouldn't have to use me as a pillow if you didn't wriggle around so much while you sleep. I like listening to your heartbeat." She turned to face upward, smiling. A strand of hair fell across her face. She looked up rumpled and content and absolutely beautiful. "Celestia, damn, you're pretty." "Oh, hush, I need a shower. Mascara and mane brush before I even look halfway decent. If you weren't pretty, would I do this? The taste of her lips, as wonderful as it seems for the first time they kissed, although much less hasty than those stolen moments from her dorm so many years ago. You're incredible, Octavia laughed. Cool? Don't pretend you're done with me, Finley scratched. I know you're not as thick as you make out. Octavia heaved herself into the sitting position immediately, clasped her forelegs around herself with a shiver. Blast it all, and I did forget to shut the window again. Sorry, love, it's like an ice box in here. All the more reason for snuggles, she squeaked as she pulled down again into another embrace. Finley, she giggled, I have to go to work, and I already need to shower first. Snuggles eclipse showers? They do not. Do too. You really are incredible, Wrench, you know that? Yeah, but you love me anyhow. Octavia's head thumped down into the pillow framed perfectly between her with the white forelegs. She had smiled upwards. Yes, I do love you, but I don't love being a smelly beast. I'd kiss you even if you're a stink of an old fish, and cow dung, and moldy cheese. You painted such a lovely picture. She reached up and pulled down for another deep kiss. Whatever I'd do with myself before you came into my life, you grotty creature. She traced her hoof lightly, producing a shiver of pleasure. Oh, it's like that, is it? Her kiss seemed to go on for too long, and at the same time ended far too soon. The alarm clock rattled out a warning that they were indeed going to be late for work. Octavia sighed. To be continued? To be continued, she agreed. Very much so. I might not even get to the front door closed when you get home. I love you, Tavy. And I love you too, Vinley. Now shoo, you'll be home late today, and I'll have to wait up for you, okay? I'll wait up for you, okay? I'll wait up. I'll wait. The smell of charred flesh and wood filled the air. The walls of the practice room was so burnt, it was impossible to see the outline of the door. A gigantic pile of blackened debris smoked in the center of the floor. Abruptly still, the hot pile moved. Fumes all from the ash curled up and around round shifted top. Tiny red cherries crackled and flared of what merged oxygen remained in the room. Reached them. The flame had been doused as quickly as began, but even the air was all that's left, and it was difficult to breathe. That did not stop the face appeared from gasping it greedily. Finley pushed aside what remained of her furniture. It tumbled onto the floor, shattering into ashy fragments. With great effort, she pulled herself and onto the cargo free, rolled down the side of the pile. It wasn't especially tall, but when she hit the floor with a jolt that elected into a cry, lay there for several moments. At no point she had to let it all go what she was holding. Octavia had landed against Vinley's chest, and when they hit the floor, her cheek appeared to be pillowed there, as if she had just gone to sleep. If one ignored the massive wound that had ended her life, the fact that they were both snuggled from where Vinley's protective barrier had not been quite managed to keep them safe from her firestorm burnt Voron to a crisp. His body was still in the burning pile. As twisted outside now, he had always been on the inside. Finley had no compulsion to drag them out. She had to watch them from behind her barrier, and as she burned, it hadn't been enough to stake him away from old legends demand you stake of vampires. She had forced herself to the very limits of her strength to make sure he was fully and ultimately dead. He's gone, Tavy, she whispered. Her voice was scratchy and brought to a coughing fit that caused Octavia's body to slide sideways. Finley caught her, dragging her back to her place. She stroked Octavia's mane, and movements jagged with exhaustion. He's really gone. Beside them was an ash pile, sniffed and collapsed inwards, filling the hole Vinley had created and burying Voron's body once more. In all my life, I dreamed of him I thought that if I could finally be free of him, I'd feel. She had nothing left to cry about. That didn't stop her body from trying. She bit her lip, just too injured to tolerate the stress of sobbing deeply as she wanted to. It was all I ever wanted. She circled her forelegs around Octavia, burying her face on top of her mane. It wasn't worth the cost. And there, the tattered remains of her life, Finley screamed out of her endless grief.